Hello, public opinion aficionados, and welcome to Rasmussen Reports, where we report on things like politicized boardrooms, burning billions of dollars of shareholder value by ignoring the interests of their own customers. So, naturally, today we're going to be talking about Disney. And that company has undergone a spectacular self immolation of what was a universally loved brand by children and adults everywhere across the country. I remember back in the 80s and 90s, every family was talking about their trip to Walt Disney World, and almost everyone went to see each new movie as it came out in theaters. Well, today we're going to talk about Disney's spectacular implosion of public opinion. And I have a special lesson for Disney CEO Bob Iger in here. And make sure you hold on to the end if you want to see what I personally think is driving Disney's collapse. Now, we wanted to find a starting point, but when I searched through our polling, we really didn't start polling about Disney until they got, really blatantly politicized a few years ago. It turns out that most other pollsters are kind of similar, so there wasn't much out there. Although hat tip to a friend of this channel, John Nolte, writing for Breitbart, who was able to find a poll from 2021 that said that Disney had a 77% favorability rating. That's pretty respectable. So not that long ago, Disney was soaring in the clouds. But as of last fall, the last time we asked favorability for Disney, here are the results. 22% had a very favorable impression of Disney, 29% somewhat favorable, for a combined total of 51%, or still a majority of Americans. 19% said somewhat unfavorable, and 21% said very unfavorable. So 51% favorable to 40% unfavorable, or above water 11%. But here are the numbers from last week, the last time we asked this question, and it's quite a bit worse. Down to 19% very favorable, 27% somewhat, for a combined total of 46%, or a 5-point loss. 22% somewhat unfavorable and 23% very unfavorable, for a total of 45%. So 46% to 45%, 1 point above water. That's a 10-point loss for Disney in only 7 or 8 months. Horrible collapse. And I'll also point out now that more Americans view Disney very unfavorably than very favorably. Now, we most commonly ask about favorability for national political figures, so I thought it would be interesting to see where Disney stacks up. And here it is. Disney is viewed less favorably than the most hated name in all of politics, Donald John Trump. He has a 50% favorability rating the last time we asked, and 30% of Americans had a very favorable impression. To Disney's only 19%. Now, Disney is doing quite a bit better than our President Joe Biden, who, as you all know, had more votes in the history of our country. He's also doing way better than Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is like almost always at the bottom of the scale. But what I thought was interesting to see is that Disney is viewed less favorably than Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who ostensibly is only trying to represent the constituents for her somewhat right-leaning part of Georgia. Disney's trying to market to all of America. So again, these are really horrible numbers for a brand that was, just 10 or 20 years ago, almost universally adored by everyone. And now it polls like a divisive political figure. But since we're talking about politics, I cut the change in favorability by party. So the Democrats are up a few points, if anything, and 63% favorable impression of Disney, which is a good majority, but still, I think you'd expect it to be higher. Now, Republicans have moved, if anything, sideways, but they're already at rock bottom for Disney. Only 12% of Republicans have a very favorable impression. 21% say somewhat favorable. So that's about 1 in 3 Republicans overall saying they have a favorable impression of Disney. But the big news here is the independent numbers. And look at that collapse. 58% favorable back in September of 2023, down to now just 36%. That's a 22-point collapse. And unfavorable impression among independents is up 22 points as well, for a 44-point swing. So political independents have now joined Republicans in pretty much hating Disney. And so here's our lesson for Disney CEO Bob Iger, who recently had a quote, something to the effect that he wanted to quiet the political noise surrounding Disney. If political independents now hate your brand just as much as Republicans, that's a clue that there's something going on that transcends politics. It's got to be something else. Well, we thought that we'd try and take a stab at figuring out what it was. And here's one attempt that we did a year ago. Are the new Star Wars movies made by Disney better or worse than the original Star Wars movies? And again, you could insert any brand there, but Star Wars is the most prominent one to look at. 22% of Americans said better, but 31%, 9 points more, said that the movies that Disney made were worse than the originals. Kind of bad, but it's even worse when you look at the age numbers because that better signal was almost entirely driven by people who weren't alive for the original Star Wars movies. 41% of 18 to 39-year-olds said the new ones were better, 24% said worse. But look at the 40 to 64-year-old age range. Those are the people that probably went to Star Wars when it opened, most of them anyways. 12% said Disney Star Wars were better, 40% said worse. So that signal maybe means something, but we got it one that was much stronger. And that's from this set, again, polled last week. A Disney executive has said that the company has, quote, many LGBTQIA characters in our stories. Is such programming appropriate for children under 12? And it turns out the answer is pretty much no. 33%, or 1 in 3 Americans, said yes to that question. 54%, a strong majority, said no. 13% weren't sure. But where does that 33% stack up on the scale of craziness? Well, it's a little bit more than the 31% of Americans who now support slavery reparations, and it's quite a bit more than the 27% of Americans who support legal abortions after 3 months. But let's talk about the party numbers. And Republicans and independents are, again, polling almost identically on this. 21% of Republicans say yes, 24% of independents, but 71% of Republicans say no, and 60% of independents. Democrats are polling all by themselves. 50%, although that's kind of a small number, say yes, but 35% of Democrats say no, that it's not appropriate for children under 12 to be exposed to LGBTQIA characters by Walt Disney. So when I see Republicans and independents polling in lockstep on this question, it's a clue that we're onto something. So let's explore further, shall we? Quote, Disney should return to wholesome programming and allow parents to decide when their children are taught about sexuality. Agree or disagree? It turns out that almost everyone agrees with that statement. 53% strongly agree, and it's really rare to see a strong majority of Americans agreeing about anything. Another 18% somewhat agree for a combined total of 71%. 12% of Americans somewhat disagree, 10% disagree strongly for 22%. So 71% to 22%. And if you look, by a 5-to-1 margin, Americans are more likely to strongly agree with that statement than strongly disagree. Now, I went and checked all the way through the crosstabs, which are available to Platinum subscribers of Rasmussen Reports, and I'll spare you the effort of looking. Majorities of every single demographic agree with this statement, even Democrats. And here's the proof. 73% of Republicans strongly agree, 14% somewhat, for a combined total of 87% of Republicans. 51% of independents strongly agree, 21% somewhat, for a combined total of 72%. But even 58% of Democrats at least somewhat agree with that statement, and only 35% disagree, and only 15% disagree strongly. Only 15% of Democrats strongly disagree that Disney should return to wholesome programming and allow parents to decide when their children are taught about sexuality. Again, I can't emphasize enough how infrequently we see this many Americans agreeing about anything. With numbers this strong, we are definitely over the target. So what's the takeaway? Well, Disney is cranking out movie flop after movie flop. Park attendance is down big. Their streaming is hemorrhaging money, and they think they have an issue with MAGA or with politics. But I think the answer is much simpler. No, it's not politics. Americans think you're creepy and don't trust you with their kids. If you agree or disagree, make sure you post your thoughts in the comments at YouTube. And if you like someone asking questions like this to get to the bottom of our major issues, make sure you subscribe while you're there. And also follow us on Twitter at Rasmussen_poll. And thanks for watching.